Good evening, everybody. So, as we are starting to round off part two, as we're looking at the shapes and segments in the ocean industries, I'm lucky enough to be joined by Delfina here, and she's going to talk a little bit about herself and what she does and what she's done in the ocean industries and how it kind of relates to the shapes and segments and sustainability and how we might redesign the ocean industries to be a better place to work and live. If you want to
Well,
introduce yourself a little bit.
thank you, Jacqueline. Such a pleasure to join you. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer for FRACHT. FRACHT is a global logistics provider. And for those who are not German speaking, FRACHT means freight.
Mhm.
So we were founded in 1955 in Basel, Switzerland. And we grew from being just a freight forwarder to a global logistics company.
Mhm.
And we are tremendously committed to the topic of sustainability in all aspects of logistics and are actively looking for ways to advance our efforts in ocean
Mhm.
transportation, which is a lot harder to do than it is to talk about.
Yeah, that's entirely true. And I think that, with logistics, only part of it is ocean freight. So I see it also as not only part of the ocean industries, but also an adjacent field that has a big impact on the ocean industries and how they relate to each other and how they need to be digitalized in a similar way. And there's a lot of knowledge transfer and a lot of data transfer that has to happen between shore-based logistics that are multimodal and waterborne logistics, which I think is quite interesting. But I know that you spent
Yeah.
actually a lot of time in energy and oil and gas in your past. Um, and I was wondering if you want to kind of expand about that a little bit, because that's
Love to.
also part of the ocean industries and plenty to do there as well.
It's part of who I am. It's in my DNA, right? So, as you well know, Jacqueline, I started off as a roustabout on a drilling rig in 1979 in the middle of the water. And have I can tell you that the most wonderful professional times that I've had have been working on the water in the oil and gas space, in
Mhm.
pulling oil out of the bottom of the ocean.
Mhm.
There's nothing more exciting.
Mhm.
But what we have managed to do in the offshore oil industry is advance our use of digital technologies, of communication technologies to improve our efficiency and our effectiveness in operations on the water. I think out of a matter of necessity, we have advanced those topics, and the non oil and gas uh, water associated businesses
Mhm.
have not had that same driving need as we have.
Mhm.
And as we all know, necessity is the mother of invention.
Why do you think that is in this space? Why do you
It's very
think that?
simple: costs.
Mm.
So, what it costs us to do to pull oil out of the ocean floor in deep sea is an incredibly expensive task.
Mhm.
And as someone who lives in Norway, should be very proud of the fact that very smart people in Norway were the pioneers that figured out how to leverage onshore operations to support offshore activities through digital communications. So I'm not sure if your audience members are well versed in that history. It's Norwegian history, and it is also oil and gas history.
Mhm. I don't know
That the
how
Norwegian
many.
government,
Yeah, I don't know how many are
what's that?
following. I don't know how many are following this project specifically from Norway, but I think it's like 24% of the people who are following these kind of segments and series of videos as I struggle through trying to grasp the entire ocean industry and how we might do it better. But I think it's kind of really interesting how you were talking about that costs were driving efficiencies. Do you think that that's always going to hold true? Or do you think that that's something that's
No.
adapting as the rules are changing? Because, of course, you're
Yeah,
also very involved in ESG, and that's,
exactly.
I think, can be a big game changer, like I talked about on Sunday, for decommoditizing a very commoditized industry, because the industry is seen as transport is transport. And I think that that's going to change quite a lot with ESG.
I agree. And so that's where I was going with my comments is that
Mm,
invention was the mother of necessity for us in the oil industry because we were needing to leverage, to innovate, leveraging information technology, digital communications to move us forward. Whereas now, today, a driving force for us in the world of transportation is on the topics of sustainability. Sustainability is now a huge, huge global topic with global interest being supported by countries, nations, the United Nations, with the sustainability, the 17 sustainability goals that
mm-hmm,
were enacted in 2015. The world is far more engaged in the conversation.
mm-hmm,
And what makes, what connects everything in this world physically, and that is transportation, and what connects different parts of the world are our oceans. And so, how we move things from one side of the world to the other, whether it be across the water or through the air,
mm-hmm,
is of concern to people as to how we're doing that. Are we doing that in a way that is minimizing a negative impact to our planet?
mm-hmm. Do you think that there's actually movement past talk? Because, of course, to be able to tackle any of these huge sustainability goals, there's a need for a lot of collaborative development. It's not like one company can say one day, I'm going to switch my fuel to whatever and have it be available for them everywhere that they need it. And do you think that, you know, as we move forward to try to tackle some of these challenges and do kind of collaborative development or do joint ventures towards it with many companies, like bigger joint ventures than I think have ever been tackled before, because you'd have so many different stakeholders that would need to be involved, or as giant clusters or mega clusters, or how do you think that these are going to evolve in the relationships that will need to happen in order to make them possible, and moving past talk to actual on the boots operational development, because it's not going to happen overnight. I don't
No,
think.
not at all. But I will say this. I think that what we need to do is recognize the fact that there are a couple of ways that historically things have moved forward when there is a big problem to solve.
Mhm,
One is necessity. So let's start with that to begin with. When there are regulations that are put in place, when all large organizations must answer to a higher legal power,
mhm,
then they will be forced to make changes, to innovate, to change the way that they do business.
Do you
Right?
think it should be regulatory force, or do you think it should be industry pull? Because of course you have many industry bodies that actively try to, in a way, regulate through best practice, but none of them are giving really the wider industry voice. Do you think that, one, it would be wise if they did a regulatory push, because then maybe the regulations, like the current emission regulations, might have unintended consequences, like longer ballast voyages to offset the carbon emitted when carrying cargo, and those kind of calculatory challenges? Or do you think that it might be more prudent to have industry bodies go together and say, we know that this stuff is coming. We know that it's going to be a challenge. We know that it's not solvable right now 100%. And have them approach and try to innovate and try to market test possible solutions or possible new contract frameworks before that stuff comes down on their head. I mean,
So
there's risks either way.
there are risks right away. So let's be very prudent about this. The right answer, the best answer, is for industry to get their proverbial act together, for a consortium
Mhm.
of organizations to coalesce, collaborate, and come up with intelligent solutions.
Mhm.
The challenge that we face is that will take longer to achieve in a world with a lack of patience for the topic of sustainability, and most specifically about climate change.
Mhm.
And in different parts of the world, it may not be climate change, it might be human rights issues.
Mhm.
So, whatever the topic is, under the framework of ESG or sustainability, there is an impatience at hand. That's
Mhm.
number one. That leads to point number two, which is that the governments are going to respond to their constituents that are impatient.
Mhm.
They cannot, in my opinion, they should not be left to their own devices,
Mhm.
because it is unreasonable to expect an elected official to have the knowledge and expertise that we have in the industry to make laws, rules, regulations
Mhm.
that are really suitable for achieving the end goals of have sustainable business
Mhm.
and a sustainable world.
Yeah.
So it's incumbent upon us to educate our elected officials and help drive policies
Mhm.
that are put in place. Because if not, in absence of that, we get lopsided regulations that come out that are not optimal.
Well, and I think a lot of them tend to be because people are so angry. There's a lot of,
Yeah.
social injustice, climate injustice, anger, which is not necessarily productive, because they're not saying that
Yeah.
there's actually a solution to this or coming to the table. How can we solve this? They're coming to it like, we're angry. You ruined everything. Now
Yeah.
it's not my responsibility to fix it, it's your responsibility to fix it. And yet there isn't right now a way to fix it on the scale that it needs to be fixed. And I think we all have to come to these problems as, kind of solution makers and builders, and not as kind of
Critics,
angry and petulant and going,
angry
it's
critics.
all your fault,
Yeah.
please fix it. Because I mean, even coming at it from that angle, it's not one generation that's done this. It's a couple generations that's this kind of problem has been perpetuating since the Industrial Revolution, and it doesn't seem to be
Mhm.
slowing down anytime soon. And when you look at the energy mix charts, you're seeing that there's green energy coming online, but it's not replacing anything else. It's just adding to sustaining the energy growth that's needed for the populations
Yeah,
that are now coming online. And I don't think that it's necessarily fair or socially just to say to the third world, sorry, you can't have electricity because it will raise emissions. And so you must always be a third class citizen of the world because you got
yeah,
it last, so you're not getting it. And I think that we have to come up with better solutions to that. But the only way we can is if we're working together towards solving these issues. And the ocean industries have a long way to be able to contribute to that, not necessarily from the global emissions perspective, because it's still the most sustainable transport besides a pipeline.
that's right.
Even if per ton delivered, and if you were to stop the ships, then you stop food and a lot of other industries completely, which
That's
is
right.
not sustainable or good either. So we have to find the best way to live with it and the best way to also improve it and work alongside all of the other industries that are needed, and even switch more things over towards ocean industries as far as production and food and transport that's currently
Mhm.
being done on land. Which kind of brings us back to your logistics thing. Um, where do you think the space needs to go in the next 5 years?
I think that there's a couple of things that we need to do. Those of us as companies that have the ability to take a leadership position need to do so. And we need to do that, which is my second point, in collaboration with each other. There is enough room for all of us to win. And this is one of those times where we have to take that mindset.
Mhm.
And so, if you look at the past, if you look at social responsibility that has occurred in history,
Mhm.
it has always begun with the leadership at leading companies that have stepped up and said, we are going to behave in a more socially responsible manner. And we're starting to see that now,
Mhm.
where there are many of the very large companies that are stepping up their efforts and their commitments,
Mhm.
from companies that are within the maritime industry, the energy industry, and the consumers of the services that are provided
Mhm.
by the logistics companies, coming together and saying, what can we do as a partnership to improve things?
Mhm.
So maybe how we procure goods, how we want things moved can change based on your abilities to move things around, right? Putting it in very simple terms. And having those discussions where you bring people in the room together to innovate collaboratively is actually what my job is all about today. As a chief sustainability officer, I spend an inordinate amount of time talking with our customers and with our suppliers
Mhm.
to say, what can we do to improve? And taking a responsibility as a larger company to say, how can I help smaller companies that may not have the financial strength to put their best foot forward?
Mhm.
Are there things that we can be doing to help smaller companies? And are there ways that we can innovate and redefine operational excellence for ourselves that will help our customers?
I like how you said redefining operational excellence. I think that's a very
Yes.
good way to put it because we are not going to get zero on anything tomorrow. Because even if you
Nope.
switch to an energy source that might be hypothetically zero, it's not going to be actually zero because the electricity is going to be sourced from somewhere else, or the transport to get it to the location is also maybe not. So all you can do is really try to redefine the operational excellence, and I think that that's one way to look at when you look at abatement of an industry. You're looking at abatement of scope 3 because
Yeah,
the ocean industry is the world's scope 3.
it is.
And I think that there's a lot that can be done there, but there's also an inherent complexity to being able to do so.
Absolutely. And that's another point that I want to make is that there is a tremendous amount of education
Hmm.
that needs to occur. So you talked about earlier about people that are critics, that are angry critics. The angry critics, the generation that is claiming that other generations have done this to them, are not sufficiently educated to understand the accusations that they're making and the responsibility that they need to take.
Well, I think they understand in a simplistic way.
Yes,
Yes, there's this happening, but the overall
it's not
system
simple.
is very complex because when you talk about sustainability, a lot of people are talking about it at a certain simplicity level, and they go immediately to emissions. But it's also the financial viability and sustainability of a business long term. It's being
Yep.
able to provide work, because that's one of the sustainable development goals.
That's
um,
right.
it's to have clean air, it's to have clean water, it's to be able to make sure that we're responsibly using materials so that we don't deplete them
Yeah.
out of possible use in the future. And then you
And
get
you
into
cannot
things like
deny.
circularity, you get into things like all of the other social issues, and making sure that the work life is good and balanced. All of these things are part of the umbrella of what is sustainable, and it's quite difficult if you're looking at it from a pure emissions perspective. You say, well, why don't you do this and why don't you do that? And go, it's not quite that simple. I wish it
It's not.
was.
No, it's not. And if we're talking about from an energy perspective, you also cannot deny less fortunate nations their access to energy.
Mhm.
Forget clean energy.
Energy at all.
They need they energy at all, right?
Rolling
And if you think
blackouts. There's, maybe they'll be lucky if they get to use a computer at work or in school and they get to learn about how to use one. Maybe the only technology they've been in contact with their whole life is an old Nokia phone. And
maybe
they don't have clean water, they don't have clean food, they don't necessarily have pumps. They to pump water places. There's still a lot of social inequity going on that we can only really solve if we're thinking about how to produce energy differently and how to scale in a dramatic way. And I feel like
and
that's what's missing a bit in the kind of clean energy movement is scale.
so one topic that or phrase that we are very recently using over and over again in the oil industry is that of a master plan.
Mhm.
So if you look at clean energy, alternative energies, it's not just solar, it's solar and wind and LNG and hydrogen, green hydrogen and
And
blue and
bio.
pink and gray and all the different types of hydrogens
Mhm.
and biofuels. And what did I miss? Electrification, all
Ammonia.
of the ammonia. Yes. So if you take a look
Methanol.
at ethanol, right? So there's
Nuclear is one that you missed
nuclear.
that could be
Let's
a
not
very
forget
big
nuclear.
part of the picture.
Yeah, or it should be a big part of the picture,
Mm.
a bigger part of the picture than it is, but it has such a negative uh, um, uh, press around it
Yeah.
that people automatically say no, 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 no nuclear. But if you take a look at all of those things,
Mhm.
we need to understand.
Well, to be honest, I would think that having a nuclear facility near me would be much preferable than an ammonia or hydrogen facility near me, because the probability of an accident that
Yes.
impacts my life or kills me is probably less by a substantial amount if it's nuclear. But
Right,
people
but
don't want to
there
talk
are
about
people
that
that
either,
don't know
because
that.
people think that, oh well, hydrogen is the perfect solution. It's going to be so safe and so clean and so, but it's really really dangerous, and that's similar to ammonia. Yes, you could use it. Yes, it could potentially work. There's some energy density questions there. There's some production questions there. There's some
Yeah,
transportation questions there.
yeah,
But the biggest
yeah,
questions have to do with humans and working near it and being able to handle it safely and not having leaks in pipelines and not having slip through an engine of a very small molecule and not poisoning people on a large scale. And with hydrogen, it's similar, except for you're more worried about explosion than poisoning, but it's still quite terrifying.
right. And so I think one of the points you're trying to make is if we rush into solutions without understanding the larger picture, we can create more harm than we are
Mhm.
doing good
That's what I
from a
worry
safety
about with
standpoint.
the regulatory angle. If the regulatory says, well, ammonia or hydrogen is the answer, um, I think we'll be missing out on a lot of potentially good and stable solutions.
Yeah. And then the other thing that we are recognizing as a world is that governments, as they are making their regulatory decisions, whether those governments make decisions that are creating sticks
Mm-hmm.
versus carrots,
Mm-hmm.
are going to play an important part in how different energy segments advance and where the financial community will invest their dollars to allow those energy opportunities to advance.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that so far in this project. Is really what is encouraging good growth versus discouraging bad growth,
Yep.
when you're talking about what regulatory or even finance or even insurance can do as they try to influence the growth and direction of the industry. I think
They
that's
will
quite
influence it by
interesting.
putting
Of
their
course, they
money,
will. The
right?
question is
And so
how.
where am I going to invest? I'm
Yeah.
going to invest in energy industries that is supported by a government that's giving me tax credits,
Hmm.
that wants this to be advanced and is going to reward that behavior.
Well, I think the
That's where
other
my money's going to
thing, coming on to your thought there and joining the train, would be what would happen, because then you're talking about it in a very nationalistic sense, where it's driving development in one country that might be opposing development in the other. And then if you're talking about places like Europe or places like the US versus places where they need to develop a lot more energy, like Namibia or Somalia or um, Algeria, or places where they have rolling blackouts if they have power available 24/7 at all. Um, what would that look like if you're only encouraging development in one place? That's why I think that the financial instruments is such an interesting way to go. And looking at scope 3 as a driver, as a method of change, could be potentially more interesting because it could drive kind of that global
Yeah,
aspect of it instead of having it be so regionalized, because regionalization won't get us to sustainability.
no, not at all.
And I think that the Norwegian government has done a lot to try to drive development in the region, but I think that in the end it might be problematic because people aren't looking for what the wider market could be, and people don't look at developing world as necessarily big market opportunities. But there are in fact a lot of people that have a lot of possibility to contribute to the world and
Yeah,
potential there, where there could be solutions we've never dreamed of, but they're not necessarily looked at both from a talent perspective or from a market perspective. But maybe that's the next big opportunity. Although I think China sees it because they're developing a lot of the third world. But
yeah, but China is a classic example
yeah.
of one part of the world negatively impacting another from a climate
Hmm.
perspective.
Yeah, of course.
So we've seen the explosion of the solar industry here in the United States of America,
Hmm.
where there's more and more solar farms popping up every day. Where
Hmm.
are the majority of those solar panels made? They're made in China.
Yeah, of course.
And what powers those solar plants?
Coal.
Coal-fired electricity,
Yeah.
right? So at the same time, do you deny the Chinese population from having that job opportunity?
Yeah, of course. I think that there's really a lot of complexity in this, and
There
a
is.
lot to unpack and explore. Um,
Yeah. Education is what we need.
yeah.
Open
Well,
dialogue. We like these conversations.
we need a lot more dialogue and a lot more kind of complexity mapping of all of this, not only overlaying details of the different parts of the industry and how the sectors interact with each other, but also all the stakeholders and people that are involved.
Yeah.
Because in the end, when you change one part of this, or you change one part of logistics, or you change one operational aspect or contractual aspect, you end up impacting the design of 1,000 jobs or more,
Yeah.
because you've changed the workflows. And as soon as you change the workflows or you introduce digital tools, you're changing the design of that workspace and how people should work within it. And that should be done thoughtfully. You should
Yes.
do it in a way where you go, these people will use this tool because it will help them accomplish this in a better way. But then you're also maybe displacing work elsewhere. You're changing the education that they need. You're changing the skill sets that might be needed. You're changing the focus level of the work. Maybe
Yeah.
it's much more complex and much harder to do, or maybe it's much, much easier. And then they just sit there zoning out. And then you have other accidents because people aren't good at monitoring things. So there's really a lot of complexity to unpack here. Um, I don't think we're going to get into too much more of it tonight. But is there anything else you want to share with?
What I would share is this, Jacqueline. Despite the challenges ahead of us, despite the enormity of the problem, on a regular basis, on a daily basis, I am encouraged by the different organizations that we are associated with, both as our customers and our suppliers, willing to step up and take up a leadership position and to have the conversations and to work towards actionable efforts where
Mhm.
we can make a positive impact, and also supporting those who are educating the broader population, from children in grade school all the way to universities that are changing their curriculum
Mhm.
to expand and integrate the topic of sustainability
Mhm.
into different programs. So it starts with our children all the way through businesses that are collaborating.
Mhm.
And I can attest to the fact that that's happening today, maybe not as fast as many would like, but at least we're moving in the right direction.
Mhm. I think acknowledging complexity is a long way towards that, and to say it's not a black and white world, and, and
Yeah.
we're all operating in different shades of gray. I mean, even doing this and
Yeah.
talking about sustainability, I'm using electricity to do this. Hopefully, it's from the hydropower plant, but you never know. Um,
That's right.
and we all are hopefully assuming and doing our best um, as we move forward. And yeah, I think that's all we can do is try to improve every day a little
Yeah.
bit. And as companies to kind of take on a stance of improvement and collaboration because no one's doing this alone. We can't. Not
No,
possible. But
not at all.
thank you for joining me. Thanks for the conversation. It's always great talking to you.
Always my pleasure.